radical policy done. We need your energy. We need you to keep informing us and educating us, because you've been doing this work for, is it now a 30-year organization?
Yes.
Exactly. So thank you. A special thank you to Brother Ari, who has been just fantastic in making sure that I got here and that everything is okay. And thank you to my ancestors for allowing me to be in this space right now to do this work, which is overdue. So I'm actually going to start with reading a statement that I had after the victory that we had in Evanston. I'll start there and then I'll work back. And this was in November of last year. I want to thank my colleagues on City Council, City Clerk Devon Reed, Gabrielle Johansson, the Equity and Empowerment Commission, and the community at large. A special thank you to Lisa Laude, Camone Hendricks, John Veal, for supporting the actions we have taken to date, including a reparation fund on October 15, 2019. Thank you for the early support from my senator, Laura Fine, Dino Robinson, Cam Howard, who's the national male co-chair of Cobra, and the National African American Reparation Commission led by Dr. Ron Daniels, which includes our own in Evanston, Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste, who was previously an alderman on the council in which I served. 400 years ago, African enslavement was established in America and has informed our nation's systems, institutions, and cultures since. It informs everything in our nation, our state, city, and neighborhoods. Disparities in wealth, life expectancy, academic achievement, food security, housing equality, information access, social capital, environmental assets, and quality of life remain. I recommend reading the New York Times 1619 report if you haven't yet. It was helpful. 400 years later, we carry the trauma of kidnapping, torture, rape, compounded by oppression and discrimination, further agitated by disenfranchisement, unequal access to everything but poverty, and topped off with microaggressions, and yet Black residents are still extraordinarily hopeful, resilient, and innovative. The acknowledged historic wrongs in our city, Evanston, directly responsible for local segregation, wealth divide, and overall lesser quality of life, livability for Black Evanston residents. On June 10th, we unanimously passed Resolution 58R19. It acknowledged our unfortunate past and our commitment to end structural racism and achieve racial equity. This resolution was one of hundreds that we passed in the last few years, and dozens have been in the spirit of equality, inclusion, Black history, and progress. So holding true to our ceremonial traditions and statements, I am requesting that we take an action as radical as the historic redlining still impacting Black families today. We cannot quantify the wealth loss in our city due to redlining, but our data shows that our efforts in the history of our city have not been enough. In fact, our wealth divide has increased. Our Black home ownership rate is at its lowest point since the 1960s, and our Black population has declined now to a new low of 16%. We were at 26%. A reparation policy is our best step in repairing the demonstrable damages to Black families, Black neighborhoods, Black institutions, and Black businesses. We are leaders in Evanston, and it is time we lead our city past ceremony and apology and into the overdue commitment of reparative policy. Number one reason residents settle in Evanston is for our diversity. Let's honor our diversity with actionable policy and funding that uplifts our neighbors that have been excluded. The case for our local reparations is found in historic redlining in Evanston and is well documented at our local museums. We also have 3 to 5 generations of lineage, Black lineage living in our family. Let's take action, I asked my colleagues on City Council. $10 million to start a fund, primarily a redlining reparation fund for African American residents, is a step towards repair. Of course, we outline redlining, but there is no coincidence that the area includes Census Tract 8092, which is where I live and have raised my family, our lowest income neighborhood in the community, as well as our lowest income generally. $46,000 is more than the average income of Black households. $46,000 is also the income disparity between Black and white households in Evanston. The median white household income in Evanston is $89,789, and the median Black household income is $43,000. Not because of talent or ambition, but because of racial discrimination and oppression. Yet we must provide for our children, secure housing, pay the same tax rate, pay for college, navigate loss, trauma, and emergencies, sustain businesses, support our aging parents, and dream. We must do all of this with $46,000 less in the same community. It is difficult. The red line neighborhood also includes our lowest life expectancy, a disparity of 13 years of life between the census tract in which I live in and the average white. With this fund, we can implement programming to directly invest into Black Evanston. Our measurements of success can include increase in Black household income, increase in Black home ownership, increase in revenue of Black-owned businesses, improve infrastructure for historically Black and redline neighborhoods. We are a city for all people, and our goal is to close the disparities established by the intentional oppression of one racial group, Black folks, expanded by the continuation of the wealth transfer which was established in the slave economy. So how do we do it? In Evanston, how we're doing it is racially biased arrest for marijuana possession has adversely impacted the Black community, and the damages in some cases will linger for generations, certainly. Consequences from marijuana convictions limit and exclude residents from housing, employment, and student financial aid. The war on drugs and mass incarceration have devastated the Black community, and although some policy is being corrected, the impact remains. It is appropriate that the sales tax revenue from the recreational marijuana be invested in the community in which it unfairly policed and damaged our community. 71% of marijuana arrests are in the Black community of Evanston, although we were declining 16%. And all reports that I found show that whites and Black consume cannabis at the same rate. There's clearly a disparity. We have discussed reparations in this nation since 1865 with 40 acres and a mule. We've updated the conversation supporting HR 40 since 1989. And in 2019, and it was important that this got passed in 2019, our 400-year Black resilience. In 2019, we've not had the bipartisan support to take an action. In this 400-year Black resilience, we must take an action in our localities, actions as radical as the crimes against humanity that had created our divide. Let's move reparations discussions to the cities we live and serve in, working parallel to the national movement of HR 40. I asked my colleagues to support me in 126R19. It passed with an 8-1 vote last November. And so I know that I can't do that alone. You know, I'm one of 9 on a city council, mostly a white and affluent community. As I stated, 16% is our population and it's on a decline. And that is why it was important that we do something radically different. And I went into office believing that good faith, hard work, some more diversity and inclusion, and all of these programs that we've done would be enough for us to bridge the disparities. And my frustration grew because as hard as we worked, the more work we uncovered. The disparities were growing. And I felt like they're making a mockery of me, and I'm delusional if I keep on in the same direction, doing the same work, supporting the same policy, and expecting a different outcome, right? So it was time that we wake up, we stand up, we do something bold and different, and this was my proposal. And so for me, this process took less than a year. It was several months. And I'll tell you, there was talk about feasibility and commissions and so on. And I looked at our infrastructure and how we can actually get policy done. And I chose a route that I'm gonna share with you today. So in February, actually, this makes 1 year that I started the reparation discussion. And it was an informal discussion at this point. It was an email to our Equity and Empowerment Commission requesting that they look at reparations. And so one thing that is great about my city is we had already done some really important steps. We had hired a chief equity officer, and our mayor had appointed a Equity and Empowerment Commission. So I had now a working body that I could send this referral to, and that's what I did. After several emails back and forth and some informal discussions, I made a formal recommendation that they pursue reparations for Black residents. So this timeline that I'm gonna share starts with June. One thing that was really important is the resolution that I may or may not have been so excited about. It was actually 58R19. Important. It was a commitment to end structural racism and achieve equity, racial equity. And my frustration with that is we packaged that in many different ways, and we've introduced similar things, and there was no action behind it. There was no plan towards the repair. But what I did was I enthusiastically embraced this resolution, and I used it as the springboard. I use it as how do we justify that we continue to do these resolutions and not do the work now, reparations. So I said, hey, look what we did in June. This was great, wasn't it? We passed this thing and we sent out a press release, and it was, we probably had cake and ice cream, right? I have an idea for action. How about reparations? So I used that really as my defense to move forward the work, because we had already said it. So all I had to do was have my colleagues and everyone in the community stand on that work that we had already committed to. So in June, it went to the committee, and we started a public process. And so it was important to me that this work was led by the residents, because in Evanston, we have, my mother, I consider myself a youngish woman, and my mother, she could only be born at the community hospital. She could only go to foster school. This was before desegregation. So we have folks in our community today that have lived the most extreme damages. We're still living it today. And they had a reference point that they still could share. They had a narrative, they had a historic context. So I invited the community into a public process that included meetings where I asked for them to share why we should have reparations. That was easy, right? The floodgates open, yeah? What we should do with reparations. What do those initiatives look like? What are we funding? Is it housing? Is it education? Is it health? How we might fund it. So although we landed on funding our reparation with recreational marijuana sales tax, there were some other ideas that I proposed initially and that the community proposed, including we have recently passed a graduated real estate transfer tax. And since much of our wealth loss, especially after the Great Recession, Black folks lost 50% of our net wealth in the Great Recession. So my initial proposal included taking at least a portion of that sales tax to fund reparation, but I was concerned it wouldn't be enough. Because that graduated tax was only on properties that are sold over $1 million. Another option was we had just passed a new amusement tax. So Northwestern University is in our town, and so they wanted to expand their public programming. We were taxing their amusements, and this just didn't seem like enough. Then we thought about just a reparation tax. That wasn't it. But at the same time, we were working through our 2020 fiscal year budget, and we were accepting the Illinois legislation for recreational marijuana sales. And lo and behold, now we have a multi-billion-dollar industry that we want to celebrate and uplift. Everybody wants a part of. And just yesterday, we are over-policed and criminalized and incarcerated with felony convictions and oppressed and so on and so forth. We can measure the damages from the marijuana convictions. We can measure that. 71% of the arrests were black folks. So how about you go ahead and you let us get that sales tax revenue so we can correct some of this damage that's been done in our community. And so that's how we got to using that sales tax revenue, and it made the most sense. It was a pure tax. It hadn't been earmarked anyplace else. So we didn't have to fight about we're taking this from parks or we're taking it from roads or infrastructure or police pension, right? It was the most appropriate use of that tax. So we had over 100 residents, and we're a smaller city. My city has less than 75,000 people in it. We'll see what the next census brings. So I had over 100 folks come in, give their feedback, another 100 write in by email or so. I contacted my senator and asked her support. And these things were very important. It was very important that you get all levels of leadership bought in on this. No one person can lead this work. No one organization can lead this work. So a Cobra has to unite with whomever else. I don't know who that is. And state reps and aldermen have to unite. And senators, we have to unite. Institutional leaders have to unite. So my ask of my community was, do you support reparations when you send me a letter? Everybody's not going to come in for public comment. So I took those letters and I compiled them nice and efficient in a packet, right? Because my colleagues are busy. We're part-time aldermen, right? We get a small stipend. And I wanted to give them this information where they could process it, and I wanted it to be well defended so that they couldn't say no, they could say, let's go, right? So we did that, and the Equity Empowerment Commission took that information and they came up with a recommendation to present to City Council. And that was our first victory. Although the initial recommendation was not strong enough, it came with a request for a feasibility statement to be done by our city manager, who had resigned and was outgoing in 2 weeks, and we were not going to have a city manager. We were going to have an intern, right? And so from the council floor, I amended that we take that feasibility part out. The data's done. We don't need any more research. We're not lab rats. We don't need to talk about how downtrodden we are, and we don't need to do that, okay? You can drive through the neighborhoods and see the disparities. You can see the inequality between the amenities in my neighborhood and the ones that's across the bridge. So let's not play that game anymore, please, people. Let's just go ahead and get to the reparations. And so with a smile, right? With a smile, I said, how about we don't do that feasibility statement and we just move forward and do the work? How about we do that? How about we just start doing the work?